It was a whirlwind tour for Blinken. The Jordanians have brought the ambassador back from Israel. The narrative from a number of the Arab states is we don't just need a pause, we need a ceasefire. So is the chasm opening up further between the Arab world and the American, and I'm very clear on this, the American response and support for Israel in their current war?
The chasm is indeed widening. It's certainly widened on the Arab street, where we've seen all these demonstrations getting more and more intense. The anger is not just directed at Israel, but to your point, also to the United States, which is seen as being an enabler. That trip by Biden to Israel a couple of weeks ago, the embrace of Bibi Netanyahu, those images are not going down well on the Arab street. In the Arab palaces, things are slightly more nuanced. I think most Arab rulers want to see Hamas defeated, but they don't want to see large Palestinian casualties happen. They need to respond, even though many of these are not elected leaders. They do need to respond to the emotion on the street. And so you're seeing things like ambassadors being withdrawn, ambassadors being called in, and Israeli ambassadors are being called in and given a talking to. It's many Arab states want to have good relations with Israel. We saw a lot of development, a lot of movement in that direction before this conflict. Now all of that is frozen. Now everyone, the first thing they say and the fifth thing they say and the 10th thing that they say is reduce the number of casualties, allow, not to your point, not just a humanitarian pause, because a humanitarian pause really means a break before the next round of slaughter. Now people are talking about ceasefire. Enough, done with, now start talking.
Right. And Bobby, I mean, there's been opinion pieces written, this idea that the U.S. doesn't need to distance itself from Israel, but from Netanyahu. Is something like that even possible? It's
very difficult, Dani. Netanyahu has been prime minister of Israel for so long now. He's so closely associated with all of Israel's policies of the last 20 years that it's really difficult. I think the Biden administration has been trying to make the argument that the United States is for Israel, not for Bibi Netanyahu. Unfortunately, in the eyes of much of the world, certainly in the Arab world, Israel is Netanyahu and vice versa. It's really difficult to separate the two.
The people that I'm talking to in the Middle East have said they're reflecting on various times gone by in the 1980s, where there was an extraction of factions within Israel and they were put into exile. For any of this to progress, can we make real progress with Bibi in charge, or does the narrative need to shift where you have America saying you need to go and we need an interim prime minister that can let us find an off-ramp with this to deliver a solution post this war?
I think that the Biden administration has been quietly briefing journalists on the side, making this exact same point, that Bibi's got to go. It's difficult for them to come out in the open and say this. You don't. Of course. He's a democratically elected leader of
in the middle of the war,
close ally in the middle of the war. But the administration has been briefing journalists exactly along the lines as you talk, as you say, Manus. And here they're also pointing out that Bibi is incredibly unpopular in Israel right now. All the polling coming out of Israel suggests the vast majority of Israelis want finally to see the back of Bibi. Whether they want to do it right this instant in the middle of the war is a different question. The polling hasn't sort of drilled down to that, the polls I've seen anyway. But they want to see him gone. The Biden administration wants to see him gone. He doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to go, and his right-wing allies who make up his coalition are not calling for him to go. Until that happens, that would be the inflection point. But that's not happened yet.
Right, yeah, let us not forget that before October 7th, there had been protests in the street of Israel from all sorts of people against what Netanyahu him and his government had been doing. Bobby, this also seems to make complicated the idea and the end goal of what happens after the bombardment of Gaza ends. How does it complicate things if at the same time the U.S., those within Israel, are calling for a new prime minister when, again, it doesn't seem as if there's a clear goal or outcome for what they're doing in Gaza right now?
That's part of the frustration that the Biden administration has with Netanyahu and the Israeli government right now, which is that they're not articulating a vision of what happens afterward. They're talking in fairly vague terms about what their goals are. Oh, we're going to destroy Hamas. What does that even mean? When you declare Hamas to be destroyed, it's not a conventional army where a general will come and sign an armistice or a surrender document. So when do you declare that Hamas is ended? And then what happens the day after? It's now been more than a month since the horrific terror attacks on Israel. Israel has been conducting this military operation now for several weeks. It's had more than sufficient time to articulate some kind of a strategy about what happens next. It has not done so. And this is adding to the frustration. When Blinken is traveling through the Middle East, he's being asked that at every point. What are you going to do after? When does this end? And what are you going to do after? And at the moment,
what is the credible? It's far from us to debate what the most credible solution is, but at this moment in time, he stops, he speaks to the PLO.
Yeah.
Abbas is a very formidable individual, or does he still have the ability?
Oh.
Does he have the ability really to be part of the solution for Blinken and the White House?
Well, the White House is clean.
Or is it going to be a UN, US? I mean, I've seen various things, UN, US style-led coalition trying a peacekeeping mission in Gaza. That's not really a formidable solution, though, is it?
No, I don't think the U.S. would have credibility on the ground because of the association with Israel. Abbas has been there forever, but he's deeply, deeply unpopular, and he has run the West Bank into the ground. Now, he has had constraints on what he's allowed to do, but it is a very sclerotic administration that he runs. He's not popular. He hasn't faced an election in nearly 2 decades. So the solution is not going to come from there, I don't suspect. Some sort of an interim United Nations run, led by the Arab members of the United Nations, administration / peacekeeping effort. At the moment, that would seem to be the most logical way to go. Nobody is stepping up to volunteer, not yet.
Okay.
Okay, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning. Bobby Ghosh of Bloomberg Opinion.